You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Toronto Sports Rush, part of the Bet Rivers Network. I'm Sara Civian, and I'm joined by a contributor we all know and love, NHL analyst and host, EJ Hradek. EJ, happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday, Sarah. Happy Friday to you.
Between the captain announcements and the jersey reveals this week, have we officially reached peak hype for the Four Nations tournament?
I think we're getting there, right? I mean, we had the 6 players announced. What was it, like last year? And then we had the reveal of the rosters on early December, which was, I don't know, it seemed a little early, because things can happen as we've seen, guys get hurt. But now that we have the captains and we're inching closer, I guess we're only about, 10, 12, I guess we're about 12 days out. So, yeah, we're getting real close to this. And hopefully nobody else gets dinged up. I feel bad for Team Finland losing Miro Heiskanen. I mean, you look at their group of defensemen and then the group they can choose from, they don't have a lot of options, and to lose Miro is a real tough one.
I know. Then you got Sweden with the goaltending. It's tough to get these injuries. But, I mean, You're grateful if you're a replacement, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I mean, and for Leafs fans, Jani Hakanpää is on the Finnish roster. Now, he hasn't played since November, and, the Leafs would probably love to have him as an option in their lineup. We'll have to see if he's able to go in the Four Nations or he can get back into the lineup for the Leafs at some point. But, yeah, Team Finland it's going to be a challenge.
Speaking of Leafs in the Four Nations tournament,
yeah.
Captain Auston Matthews got the nod for Team USA's captain as well. Do you think this was the right call?
It seemed like it was the way it was headed. I think, there's a lot of good choices, obviously for captain of that team. I guess they named Matthew Tkachuk and Charlie McAvoy as assistants or associates or alternates, whatever they're calling the guy who wears the A's now. But, those guys were all part, I believe, of the 2016 World Junior team. And so maybe that has something to do with it. Zach Werenski is another guy that was on that team for Team USA. And it's interesting because, we forget, Sarah, right? Like this best on best idea. A lot of these guys haven't worn that jersey in almost a decade because, again, 2016 World Juniors, talking to Matthew Tkachuk the other day, like he has not worn the USA jersey since then. And I would imagine the same for most of the others, with the few exceptions that I might have played in a world championship. So I think Matthews was probably the right choice. It's a short tournament. They're only going to, if you win it, you've only played 4 games. I mean, so we'll see how things go for Team USA.
I think that's such a good point about wearing the Team USA jersey or whatever team you're representing, where there's jokes floating around, right, that maybe players aren't as excited, but you talk to someone like Tkachuk and he's super hyped for this. So you got to remember that these guys do want to play for their countries and they care.
Yeah, they really do. It's a big deal. It's always been a big deal in hockey. Sarah, you're like me. We grow up. We love hockey. We watch these games. We know about, you learn about, in some cases. I was alive for it, but the Miracle on Ice years ago. But, you watch the movie probably, and then you have World Cup of Hockey in 96. You have the Olympics that we saw in 02 and 06, 10, 14. And it's part of the legend and lore of hockey is international competition. So these guys definitely are excited about it, especially the guys who haven't had that opportunity before because, Alex Pietrangelo stepped away, right? He's going to play for Vegas, but he's nursing an injury. He's going to step back from it. For me, I understand it for him. He's done it. He's won in just about every international competition there is. He's been an Olympian. He's won at World Juniors and things of that nature. So it's understandable in that case. But for most of the guys, they have not had that opportunity. And you're right. Matthew Tkachuk was pumped up. I'm sure, even Sidney Crosby, who has done it all in his career, I'm sure he's excited about being back out there again and having the chance to be with McKinnon and McDavid.
That's kind of the dream, right? So let's say, though, you're talking to a Leafs fan who is angry that Matthews is going to the tournament. Is this understandable, or what would you say to convince them otherwise?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's anything I could say to convince them otherwise. People are angry these days, Sarah, and you don't know why in some cases. So, I don't know if there's anything I could really say. But, in this case, he's one of the great players in the game. obviously the tournament's being held. Other teams have players going to this tournament. He's a very, very important piece of the puzzle for Team USA, as he is for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you just got to cross your fingers and hope nothing happens to him in this. He's had some issues this year, has been well documented. He's missed games, but he seems to be okay now. I think he will err on the side of caution. I think they've got 4 more games leading up to the break. I think if he's not feeling well and in good shape and having any other issues, he's going to play. I mean, these guys, like we just said, they all want to play. So I don't know if there's anything I can say to the Leaf fan who is worried and concerned, but you just got to hope that nothing bad happens and he's going to be fine.
You may have solved the meaning of life with that one. We can let them be angry. They deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to live with it sometimes. I don't know what to say.
And look, I know Matthews has had a slow start and a cryptic injury, but he's scored 8 of 12 games since returning from the injury, and he's got 20 goals already in 36. Is it safe to say the captain's back on track?
It seems that way. And they've got to have him going. And I think the Leafs have been very cautious with all these different injuries they've had this year. I think Max Pacioretty talked about it the other day. He's been out of the lineup, and let's face it. Teams like the Leafs, the idea is let's be right for the playoffs and, let's be healthy at that time. So I think they're trying to be cautious with that. This is a little bit of an unusual situation, an unusual year with a 4 nations tournament, a best on best tournament where the guys are going to be playing really hard in those games. So, that's a worry, I think, for all the teams that have sent players. I think the big winner in all this is the Caps, Sarah, because they've had this great year. I don't think they have any players playing in this tournament. And for those guys, they'll all be on vacation and come back and, they don't have any worries, I guess.
It's funny because Ovi would have found a way out of it regardless. But he didn't have to. So good for him.
No. Ovi though loves playing for Russia. I mean,
That's
obviously
true.
they're not in the tournament for obvious reasons, world events, but I know that the Russian players always love to wear that sweater as well. So hopefully we get to live in a world someday where things change and the Russians will be back in playing, because they're obviously very passionate hockey people there.
You speak to the 4 nations break, and it's the age-old rest versus rust problem. How do you think that affects the Leafs?
Yeah, those old rivals, they do battle every year. We talk about it in the end of the year for playoffs and different things. And, if the team plays well, everybody's like, oh, the rest was great. And if the team plays poorly, it's like, oh, they're rusty. I mean, there's, these guys will go on their, some of them will go on trips. Hopefully they'll be refreshed. Hopefully the guys who are injured have a little extra time to kind of get on the other side of things and get a little more healthy. I think it's, the season is so long, Sarah. I mean, I'm looking at the Leafs here in as we started the new calendar year. Started with 4 wins. Then they had 3 losses. Then they had 3 wins. Now they have 3 losses. I mean, I watched the, good teams around the league, the Devils. I watched the Vegas Golden Knights in the game against Columbus on Thursday night. It's a long year. It's hard to be at your best all the time. I think this break for most of these guys is going to be good. The unfortunate part about it for the Leafs is that their top players are not going to get much of a break here, right? I mean, Marner and Matthews and Nylander, will be involved here. So I think the break will be helpful and everybody will have to deal with coming back, getting settled back in. But I think it makes for a real sprint, after the trade. We have the trade deadline coming up on March 7th. It's going to be a real sprint to the finish because, I mean, points are valuable. And, looking at the Eastern Conference, I mean, everybody is still kind of alive for a playoff spot.
Yeah. The East is such a mess that it's almost like the Leafs have been able to win 3 games, lose 3 games, and still be like a top 3 team regardless. So I guess that helps them out in a weird way where it's kind of like there's a bunch of people on the playoff bubble and then it's kind of them. But at the same time, it's going to be a bunch of buyers where they might, I don't know, what do you identify as an issue that they might try to fix and how they might go about fixing it as the trade deadline approaches?
Well, you always could use, more help on defense. I think that's certainly an area that Tree Living will look to add if he can. So that's certainly, that's the old saying. I heard it back when I was living in Dallas and covering the Dallas Stars and then working for them for a short time. Bob Gainey and those guys would say you never have enough defensemen. So I think that's certainly an area that they would look to, help if they can. I mean, like Seattle is sliding out of it in the West, right? And they've got two guys that are interesting, contracts are up. The other Tanev, Chris Tanev, and he has his brother, Brandon Tanev out there in Seattle. And he's one guy that like, he brings a lot of energy and he brings, like that could be a guy that could be a good back end forward for that team that, just, brings that physical play that you need in the playoffs. I mean, that's what they're trying to make this team over into, right, Sarah? Like, Craig Berube comes in, they're trying to be harder to play against. Guys like that are hard to play against.
And that's something I criticized during the offseason. And now look at it, though. He made such great offseason moves that have really specifically affected the team in a good way. Like now defense is one of their biggest strengths, but something about the playoffs is defense can always get stronger. They could also go for Yanni Gourde. And if I know one thing about Ron Francis, he's willing to trade a pending UFA.
Yeah, see, I'm so glad because like my memory, Sarah, is weak sometimes. And I knew Tanev and I couldn't remember Yanni Gourde. So thank you so very much. But there's another great guy though. And think about Yanni Gourde. He's been part of a couple of Stanley Cup winners. He has that. He's a high energy guy. You get him. He's at the end of his contract. So, he's obviously has some things to play for. But I mean, those are two guys. I think they're going to be really sought after by a lot of teams, moving forward, Gourde and Tanev out there in Seattle. So I'll be curious to see what the market is for them. I'm sure, as you point out, with a lot of buyers, Seattle might be able to do well moving both, one or both of those guys. I think they would like to re-sign Yanni Gourde if they could. I think they would love to re-sign Tanev too, but I think that they probably feel that it's going to be more money. He's going to get more money on the open market. They think maybe they could do something with Gourde, but the bottom line is those guys are going to be on the market, and I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are very interested in them. And then, you just look around the league again and just look for, defensemen that are depth guys that can help your group. It's hard to add a top pair defenseman at this time of year as you move towards the playoffs, but certainly adding guys that can be good depth players, I think, are real value for the Leafs. So I think they, like a lot of teams, will be looking at that.
What assets do you think the Leafs are willing to give up?
See, that's a good question, right? Like, do they, how much do they have in the cupboard? Do they want to give away some of those younger players? Like, Minton is a guy that's, been playing for them, and some other guys they've got in their system. I don't know if they're that eager to give those players up. Draft pick capital, where are they in terms of how much they could surrender there? So it is, at the end of the day, you got to give to get. And if there's a lot of buyers and only a handful of sellers, the price goes up. So I guess that is something they're going to have to consider. They're going to have to see where they're at, as they get to that deadline and say, do we really think this is a guy that if we give up, a young player or a draft pick, is this someone that can really help us move forward? I think it's kind of wide open this year, Sarah, in the East. That's why I like the Carolina move for Rantanen. I think they went in big there on that. I think all these teams in the East look at it as, hey, any of us could get there this year. So, if I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the general manager decides to do there in Toronto, because I do believe they're much more of a contender than a pretender this year. And I think, it's there maybe for the taking if they have the right mix going into the playoffs.
It's funny because, you have to see how things all play out and if Rantanen signs an extension and all that jazz. But at the same time, it's looking less like a black and white situation on the trade scene these days. Like Natchez is a really good player who has already been playing so well with McKinnon. Like they have such speed. Drury's chipping in nicely. It's kind of a win-win there, maybe to me. And then you have the Flyers situation where they last night moved Frost and Farabee a few picks to the Flames for Kuzmenko and Pelletier.
Peltier.
Thank you. Can you know more about that than I do? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it's interesting, Sarah, because I think I'll start by saying I think it's a really good deal for the Flames. They get two established NHL players. You can say what you want about Frost and Farabee, but like Farabee, I think had 50 points last year. But those guys were former first round picks that never really met the expectations in Philadelphia. And when guys are like that, after a while, like I think it's best for them to have a change of scenery, because when they go to Calgary, they are no longer the disappointing first round pick of the Philadelphia Flyers. They are now a 5 or 6 or 7 year pro that's going to a team in Calgary that I think is overachieved this year, and they have, I think, a better supporting cast, and they will be pieces of that puzzle there. So it'll be a fresh start for both those players who have shown they can play in the National Hockey League. So, I think it's a fresh start for them. For the Flyers, Farabee had a more lengthy contract, so they get out from under that moving forward. Frost seemed like he was a guy. He was in, he was out. Both those guys really were in and out of the doghouse with John Tortorella over the last couple of years. But they move those guys out. They clear some space. They bring in Kuzmenko. Kuzmenko will help their power play. Their power play is terrible. It's been bad for like 3 or 4 years. It's been terrible. So Kuzmenko will give them a little bit of a shooter, below the dots in the bumper spot. You give them another weapon on the power play, but he's at the end of his contract. He makes a pretty good amount of money too. I don't think he's a long-termer in Philly. Maybe he comes in, he can kind of, help with the maturation of Michkov a little bit because fellow countrymen speak to him in his native tongue. And so that might be helpful. I just don't see him though as a long-term guy in Philly. So that money goes away because his contract is up. Pelletier is another guy that was a first-round pick. It hasn't kind of happened yet for him in Calgary. Maybe a fresh start in Philadelphia will do him some good. They get some draft picks. But I think for the Flyers and all this, the play is to create room for bigger moves, maybe before the deadline or maybe in the summer. I think that's the plan there. So in the end, I think Calgary, definitely wins the trade in terms of getting some players that can help them now. I think for Philly, we have to watch and see how this plays out with other moves they make down the road.
Yeah, and it's kind of a what is there to lose with Calgary. You already kind of did your fire sale with the big trade chips. So now it's kind of like you're in the playoff race. You might as well see what happens.
Yeah, you send a message to them, and Craig Conroy talked about it last night, and it's always the case. When your team has told you that we're competitive and we're in the mix, you might have thought we're rebuilding, we're going to be in last place, we're going to have the first pick, but that's not what's happened. And they have some really good veteran players there, and they've been very competitive on a night-to-night basis. So I think Craig Conroy is answering that from his team and saying, okay, you know what? You guys have played well. I'm going to give you a few more chips. I don't have to give up much. We felt like Pelletier wasn't someone that was going to fit with us after a couple of years. Kuzmenko is certainly, like I said, he's more of a short-termer. They gave up a second-round pick and then like another pick, which is like a 7th-rounder 3 years from now. So, I mean, that's not really that much to talk about. So for me, I think for the Flames, I mean, we'll see how this injection of a couple of more solid NHL players helps their team as they push to try to get in the playoffs.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing from these two significant deals ahead of the deadline that GMs are getting more creative and almost anything is possible. So in your ideal world, if like money wasn't a thing and if you finessed the deal of a lifetime, who would you add to the Leafs roster?
Boy, a deal of a lifetime.
Well, that's a little dramatic. Like,
yeah, it is a little. But hey, we're here for the drama.
Yeah,
we're here for the drama. I mean, I think like just a top pair defenseman would be, you can go through the list of really good defensemen that are out there, but someone along, those lines would be the thing for me that could push everybody back a little bit. I mean, it's been a good, Tanev has come in and been really good for them. He's been what they've expected. He's been a huge plus player, but he's just good in he's good in those defensive situations. McCabe has been a good player for them this year. OEL has come in and played well. Morgan Rielly, it's been a struggle for him this year, and so that's one of those, they need him to play better, but, just another good top pair defenseman. Those guys are almost impossible to get, and you have to trade significant assets to get them. So, that's what I would say. I don't even know you go into specifics of particular players who's available. I mean, there's not many of those guys available, but that's what, if something like that became available, a high-end defenseman for their team would be, I think that's always kind of been the case, Sarah, for the Leafs, is they've had so much, invested in Marner, Matthews, Nylander, Tavares. We've always said they're out of balance a little bit, and that's why adding Tanev, and to a lesser degree OEL, and the emergence of McCabe as a healthy, helpful player has helped tip that balance a little bit and help them be a better defensive group.
I wonder if they'd call old friend Kyle Dubas up for Marcus Pettersson.
Yeah, he's a guy that might be on the market. The Penguins, Again, they're in the East, Sarah, right? So we can't say they're out of it. We cannot say they're out of it. They are in the East. And we remember last year we counted the Penguins out, and then they reeled off a bunch of wins and almost snuck in at the very end. So we'll see what happens there. But you're right. I think if they continue to, if they meander and don't get closer to the playoff spot, I think Pettersson is a guy that would be available. And, people who watch him on a day-to-day basis, they really like his ability to play as a shutdown defender. He's long, he's lanky, and so he could be a helpful guy.
Finally, let's zoom in a bit to Saturday when the Leafs face the Oilers in another big Canadian matchup. Yeah. The Leafs have been petering around a bit right now, riding a 3-game losing streak, and they're 4-6-0 in their last 10. What sticks out as the most glaring issue they got to fix Saturday?
Well, they got to score some goals, right? I mean, they haven't been scoring lately. I mean, they looked really pretty lethargic against the Minnesota Wild. These last 3 games, I think they've only scored 3 goals in that stretch. So they've got to find some offense, especially against the Oilers, who've been playing really, really well over the last really couple of months now. You go back to like mid-November, they really picked it up. They lost in a shootout to Detroit in a very entertaining game on Thursday night, but I think this will wake up the Leafs a little bit. When you're playing Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. I mean, you know how it is, Sarah. We all get excited. You can't fool people, right? Like, it's human nature. You're there for a game against Minnesota on Wednesday night. Minnesota's a really good team that's been good on the road, but they're missing some star players, and you just you're just not maybe as jacked up as you need to be to play, because you need to play with a lot of emotion in this game, and Minnesota does that. So now you're headed out on this 4-game trip. You're going into Edmonton, hockey night in Canada. Everybody's revved up. McDavid, Draisaitl. I mean, I got to think that Matthews, Marner, Nylander, they're going to want to put on a little bit of a show as well. So it's a good opportunity for them to kind of re-energize. The schedule's been light lately, too. That's why it's unfortunate they weren't able to take advantage of the game on Wednesday night. They've had a stretch in the schedule where they haven't had to play quite as many games, and they didn't take advantage of it. So now 4-game road trip over the course of the week, heading towards the break. We'll see how things play out, but I do think Saturday night will be fun. Matthews, McDavid, head-to-head, that's always a good. That, to me, that's get your popcorn and enjoy the game.
100%. EJ, thanks so much for your time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Toronto.
Yeah.
And have a great weekend.
All right. See you, Sarah.
See ya.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.